Welcome to Session 7 of the Preventive Legal Advocacy Virtual Summit. Session 7 is entitled Empowering Families and Protecting Futures, Opportunities for Preventive Legal Advocacy in ICWA Cases. Our panelists for Session 7 include Sheldon Spotted-Elk, Senior Director of Judicial and National Engagement at Casey Family Programs, Shannon Smith, Executive Director of the ICWA Law Center in Minnesota, and Lisa Woodard, Associate Attorney with the Family Defense Bureau at Montana State Office of Public Defenders. All right, and with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's good to be on and talk to you about ICWA. If we were in person, I'd ask everybody to raise their hand. How many of you guys have had an ICWA case? It'd be really great to kind of understand that and learn that from you. What we're hoping to do with this panel is we're going to have it's going to be like a coffee shop conversation. And so if we do that successful, we're hopefully going to go a deep dive on preventative legal advocacy and using the tools of ICWA to really effectuate that. And there's some unique tools in ICWA. So if you're new to that area of law, ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, passed in 1978, has been called the gold standard of child welfare. And there are opportunities to really go upstream in ICWA cases more so than other cases, I would say, but I do want to get the opinion of my panel. I'll just add one more thing, and then we'll start off with a conversation and maybe a little bit more of an introduction to the work that you're doing, Shannon, and the work that you're doing, Lisa, up in Montana, to kind of learn about that. But I always share this little anecdote, and then I want to learn about your guys' work of going upstream with your ICWA cases. But I got to meet Bert Hirsch one time, and so Bert Hirsch is the pen to paper lawyer, one of the three pen to paper lawyers that wrote ICWA back in 1978. And so I got to hang out with him one time, and he told me two things that were really impactful in the way that I think about the Indian Child Welfare Act. Number one, he said that it's the only reparative law on the child welfare books. And so if you read the congressional testimonies or the congressional findings of ICWA, you could see the reason they passed ICWA, because at the time that it was enacted back in 1978, 1 out of 3 Native children were removed from their homes. And 90% of those children that were removed from their homes were placed with non-Indians. And so really, there's a legacy in this country about forced assimilation, Indian boarding schools, and dismantling Indian families. And that law was passed to repair that. And so it is the only reparative law on the books. I actually think in some ways that we need to be repairers when we show up in these cases. And so how do we show up in those healing ways? How do we show up with that type of medicine? I think PLA is one of those tools to get this law right. And that's the second thing he shared with me that was really impactful, is he said, there's nothing magic about these words. There's no magic to the words on paper, and we all know that, unfortunately, the law doesn't change behavior of lawyers or judges. So the biases that they might have, they still could show up and do terrible things to Indian families, even with these words on paper. And so it takes you and I to coordinate to really effectuate the spirit of this law. So it takes all of us to work collaboratively in order to really effectuate that spirit. And so those are two powerful things. And I do want to open it up and get some opening statements from you, Shannon and Lisa. And so maybe we'll start with you, Shannon, just about your work, and tell us a little bit more about it. You got the introduction of what you're doing, but just tell us a little bit more about what the day-to-day looks like and how you are effectuating the spirit of ICWA in your representation.
Thank you, Sheldon. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It's certainly an honor and very humbling. I've had an opportunity throughout today to hear about a lot of the work being done, and it always makes me pause and just think about how absolutely important this work is, and how there's so many individuals that are truly dedicated to doing it better. So I welcome this space, and I'm very thankful for that. As it was said in the introduction, I am the director at the Indian Child Welfare Act Law Center. We provide parent representation. I've been doing this for about 23 years, and have had the opportunity throughout that time to represent parents in proceedings from kind of the beginning to through a conclusion of a case. And it's very clear to me in this work, well, first of all, the work is amazing, and I appreciate that it's hard and it's difficult, but I am thankful, so thankful for the opportunity to work with the parents that I work with and to be able to represent them and elevate their voice in this work, and doing it early and responding to them in a place where hopefully before the courts are involved is truly an opportunity, I think, to do things right and to do things better. And so I appreciate this. I appreciate that it's something that is being talked about, that's something that's being looked at. And I think often about the families that I've represented. And I recently had the opportunity to connect with a mom who I represented many years ago. And now she is working in this amazing program where moms and babies can be together at the time of birth when there's concerns about chemical use. And this program keeps them together and allows them to heal and move forward together. And just listening to her excitement about being a part of this, because this was not a program that was available when she was going through the process. And she is reunited with her oldest little guy that I represented her with, but then she also has a new little one. And how important it is for her now recognizing the difference of being able to bring her daughter home and what that meant to her, and the true trauma of that experience, and looking back on how the damage and the pain that it caused when she was struggling, and she acknowledged struggles with chemical health when her son was born, and not having any opportunity to be together and being kind of pushed into a system that the response was to separate them, and seeing a different way, and now her being able to advocate for others to stay together with their babies, and to have a response that is meaningful and purposeful, truly was amazing to just hear it from her words, right? And so I think truly being able to listen, truly being able to respond is the opportunity of this work. So I'm very thankful for being here, and very thankful for the opportunity to really be inspired and push forward in doing this work in a place that is earlier and more meaningful, instead of just at a point where the families are separated. So thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate that. And I'm going to come back to you and ask you about some of the services and opportunities that you have to engage Native families pre-petition for the next question. But let's hear how it's going up in Montana, Lisa. I was just up in Montana at the Public Defenders Conference, and you won an award up there. You already won an award. You're a brand new baby attorney, and you won an award already for your representation, especially on ICWA cases. So tell me how your representation's going, and how you've really gone upstream and captured the spirit of ICWA.
Okay, thanks, Sheldon. Yes, I did not expect to win an award as a new attorney. I've been teased that I got a Rookie of the Year award. But yes, I am a new attorney. I'm very, very passionate about these cases. I have a background in special education and elementary ed. And then as a parent with stepchildren in a domestic violence situation, I myself became involved with the system. And that's where my passion really became for this area of law. That's why I went to law school, was to become an attorney for dependent neglect cases, which is what we call them in Montana. And I got a job that is all dependent neglect cases. I feel very blessed for that. And 6.5%, or about 7% of our population in Montana, is Native American. And over 50% of my cases are ICWA, or Native American families. Some of my cases that aren't ICWA actually involve Native American families, but they don't meet eligibility requirements. So it's a huge part of my work. I work in 11 counties, and I see a lot of differences in how cases are treated. So I have to learn how to work with the different systems, different departments to facilitate and negotiate and work for my families. But I love working up here. I love what I'm doing. I really like what you said, Sheldon, about ICWA being a reparative law. I think a lot of the policies and incentives and language in ICWA are very preventative in nature. It's all about active efforts to prevent removal of children and to keep families together. And so I do try to utilize that in my practice, and enforce the law. I can't actually do a whole lot of prevention because our state law doesn't allow a legal representation prior to a petition being filed with public defenders. But we have some wiggle room with some new laws that passed. And so I have been able to get 7 petitions dismissed before the first hearing using what I've learned from preventative legal advocacy. And so it's so huge and important. And every case is different how that works. And I know that in these cases, a dismissal, you can't see dismissal as a win. I mean, you can't win on a legal argument and then the family's still not safe or they're going to be removed. You actually have to be able to address the issues and the concerns and come to the table with everyone and work together.
Wow, I'd like to hear more about that as well. And of course, ICWA provides for tribes as a party. So tribes as a party participant in the case that would have legal representation as well. It'd be great to learn from you, Lisa, and Shannon as well, just how tribal engagement looks like and some of the services where you're maybe safety planning or you're engaging some other resources that might be helping the family beyond the legal argument making. Shannon, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tribal involvement is significant, and we know that when tribes are involved, the outcome for the family in Minnesota is better, right? And I think that's true everywhere, but certainly from our own practice, we know having the tribal voice in regards to how best to respond to families, how to engage with families, how to incorporate cultural values and customs and ideas in regards to how a path forward for the family. So Lisa, I appreciate that, right? Like as attorneys, sometimes we get super excited about dismissals, and I will continue to get really excited about dismissals, but we also want to make sure that we're responding meaningfully to families, right? And so that the tribal involvement and connection is absolutely critical. We're very fortunate. The building that I work in is owned by the White Earth Nation, and so we lease from them. And so there's all kinds of programming right in the space that I'm in. So we have mental health services, chemical health services. We have their ICWA program in our building. And so relying and leaning in to that connection is really, really important. One of the things that I think ICWA provides an opportunity for in regards to prevention is a meaningful response, and that's through active efforts. And I think ICWA compels that, it mandates that, and it's something that we can learn from in all child welfare cases. I think about, and I know Sheldon, you've probably heard this story, but I think about an elder one time came to me. I was working with a young mom, and she was the young mom was in crisis. And she was being asked to do all kinds of things, to do UA. She was being asked to do an assessment. She was being asked to go to a certain provider in order to for therapeutic services. And all the things that were being asked of her were very kind of routine in the context of child protection, child welfare. But the elder came to me and said, "This is so wrong." And I'm like, "Hey, this is the kind of stuff that, and they were community services." And she's like, "No," she's like, "We know on a very human level that when people are in crisis, that you respond to them by doing more, right? Like if someone is hurting or someone has a death in their family, communities come together to provide meals. They come together to, maybe drop off Kleenex, something really simple. They come together to bring medicines to the family. They come together to say, hey, I will give, your children a ride to school. I'll come take care of your children so that you can be here, but you can grieve. And in child welfare, when families come to us in crisis, our response is exactly opposite of what intuitively we know works so often, and we ask families to do more. So this young mom was coming to us in a place of crisis, and instead of, surrounding her and actively responding to her in a way, we were asking her to do more and more and more. And that's simply overwhelming, and something that humanly, like we all know, right? Like that's not the way that that we want to treat each other. So I think there's an opportunity in ICWA to actively respond to families in a meaningful way, in a way that meets their needs and responds to what's going on in their life in order to help them on a path forward. And so I think like the gold standard of ICWA is really such a huge piece of that is active efforts. And what that means is responding in a culturally meaningful, trauma-informed way that to that individual, and tribal involvement oftentimes pushes us to do exactly that.
Really quick, when do you usually get your appointment? And it sounds like you're centered, there's all these opportunities for engagement before a petition's even filed on a family. And it sounds like you might even often know families sometimes before a child welfare petition is filed on them. And so when do you usually get your appointment? And does your agency have the ability to kind of help out with maybe peripheral things that families might be struggling with, like housing or access to healthcare or those things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we represent families statewide. We represent them also in tribal courts. So just kind of laying that piece of it. We in Hennepin County, which is like Minneapolis, we are notified anytime a case is pled ICWA. So we for sure know before the first hearing. Sometimes it's hours before, sometimes it's weeks before. So that's when the county is involved. So we have a relationship with the county, with court administration, that they let us know. We also, because of where we're located and because we have been part of the community, we will have people walk in, or families that we've represented in the past who will step in, and either because they themselves need help or because someone else in their family or a friend. And so we'll accept, walk-ins or, being a part of the community. And so those are some of the times that we get earlier indication that something going on. Sometimes we'll, a tribal rep will call us and say, because they've got notice that an investigation is going to start. And so they will connect us with the family. So as far as the legal piece, certainly before the first hearing, but hopefully, we're trying to push it that it's not just an hour or two before, but that we know even earlier, if in fact there's going to be a case open. We are able to provide other representation. So if there's some way that we can help, avoid a child protection case open by, maybe an order for protection or some kind of voluntary custody arrangement with the family, or some kind of housing support, legal housing support, or connecting them to community resources, we're always happy to do that. We also have things like really simple things, but it definitely is important in the community. Like we have a room full of diapers, and anyone in the community can come in. It does not have to be someone that is a client of the law center, but people can come in and get diapers, or sometimes we have baby formula, different things that are so we try to be a space within the community that people feel comfortable, welcome. We have a former client that is coming in once a week because she's leading a Red Road support group, and she needs to make copies in order to get copies out into the community. So she comes in once a week to make her copies and have a cup of coffee and kind of tell us what's going on. So we try to be that kind of space where people feel welcome, and they can bring others here if they feel that we can be of help.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon. I appreciate that insight. Going to you, Lisa, a question about how you partner with tribes and some of the work that you have. And of course, ICWA provides that tribes have legal standing in these cases. And so what's the importance of that? And then there's a question in the chat for you. And so I'll loop that question as well. It's about operating in such a rural state in Montana. What does your caseloads look like, and how's your office funded? How's your position funded? So,
okay, that's a little. I'm going to save those second questions for next, or I'll get really confused. But so as far as tribal relationships, it's pretty complex in Montana, and I know it's like this in other states, but a lot of our reservations have a lot of combined tribes, and so. I heard someone say once that you can't watch culture, you have to participate in it. So I've made efforts to go to the reservation and meet people. I'm licensed in Chippewa Cree Tribal Court, and I went to a tribal council meeting. I definitely stuck out like a sore thumb there. It was very awkward, but I'm building relationships with people and learning and you know, Shannon referenced trauma, like learning a lot about a trauma. I I guess you don't realize how much trauma families have been through on reservations until you're there and you hear about, you know, patent land claims and how families have lost all of their land or you know, I mean, and there's so many crises and no remedies sometimes. There's no funding and so the relationships with the tribes are super important and knowing the difference between different tribes and knowing that your clients can come from a reservation and say, you know, they're Nakota and so they're from Fort Belknap, but they have blended traditions and customs because they've grown up around, you know, the Gros Ventre culture as well. And so you can't just read about the culture. You can't just read tribal code and think that you're going to understand what applies to their family. But getting to know what it means to them, what their culture means to them, how they participate in like tribal customs themselves. You know, a lot of times too, you have families that have grandparents from different tribes, and so then you have tribes that are totally different. So applying like tribal customs is different, but tribal relationships are really important. Some of my dismissals have included transfer of jurisdiction, and you can't successfully do that without having a relationship with the tribe and knowing that they're going to be capable of taking it on. A lot of times it involves a discussion about the services the family needs, whether the tribe is capable of providing those services, whether the state is better equipped to do that, or if they feel they can keep children safe there. And so if you just have a vague idea of tribes or you just send them a petition to transfer jurisdiction and they don't know you and trust you, it's not going to work. So it's super important. You know, I also have built a relationship with the Little Shell tribe. They're here in Great Falls. I go to their office. We had a huge meeting for like an hour. It was a great time. Learned about all the services that they're starting. They're starting positive Indian parenting, and then left that meeting and sent everyone at CPS here and the county attorneys a list of the services that can be implemented for our clients so that we can start having those services out the gate without having to fight about it in court. So that's how I use the relationships with tribes in my cases. As far as my job being funded, it's funded by the legislature, and they've tried to get raises and stuff. We're very underfunded for what we need. Our contract attorneys are very underfunded, which is why I work in 11 counties. It's very challenging to do. And Cascade is, I think all of Montana is low population compared to the rest of the country. Cascade County is more highly populated than other areas. Some areas I go to are very small, and the biggest challenge with that is there's no services. If you want to get a mental health evaluation, you've got to go sometimes 90 miles or, you know, an hour and a half. Or if you sometimes placement for children will be an hour and a half away or 2 hours away, and then facilitating visits in winter when it's icy and the parents live outside the reservation or in the mountains, it's going to be really hard. And sometimes parents get one visit a month, and it becomes really hard to advocate. And you have to consistently advocate for ways to work around lack of resources and services.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. You do have a question, a follow-up on this, and sounds like you've used ICWA transfers to tribal court as a mechanism to get dismissed in state court. Are there other examples that you've used, like some of the principles, and I know you shared that earlier, of PLA to get some of these dismissals, like safety planning? It sounds like you do a lot of out-of-court advocacy to get education to social workers, and so examples.
Absolutely. So we have prevention plans. I've heard a bunch of other speakers, they have different names for them. Basically some kind of an intervention plan to avoid a legal case. So I have negotiated several of those. And what I like about having a petition filed or me being assigned is then they have a legal advocate. So the power dynamics become a lot more fair. You know, we have families that are already dealing with like the racial disparity and lack of cultural intelligence and poverty, drug addiction, or whatever it is. And so having someone at the table there for them helps. And other people were talking about, you know, like peer-to-peer support, how that helps with self-esteem and coming in knowing what you're doing. So I use a lot of that with my clients too. I think a lot of times parents need to hear what they're doing right, and coming into the meetings with I am a good mom, you know, I can do this, and isolating issues. And so in a few of my cases, I've done motions to dismiss right out the gate. When I see there's an issue with clear and convincing evidence, I mean, as soon as I get my petition, I read the affidavit, I'm filing it. And that gives me an opportunity. Now I have leverage where they're going to meet with me. And then we can work out a prevention plan. I make sure that it's limited to, like within the scope of why the removal happened or why the state's involved, and not just overreaching into, while we're at it, why don't you get a drug test or a chemical dependency evaluation? Like, no, that's not what the issue is. The issue is that mom, it doesn't have housing or whatever. I've also used one of my favorite ones. I filed a motion to dismiss because mom went to jail and had her kids with a family member. And so I did a motion to dismiss and argued that she was the Indian custodian, and that they couldn't remove from her because they didn't have clear and convincing evidence that the Indian custodian wasn't appropriate. And we won on that one. And I had to call my own qualified expert witness for that hearing too, from the tribe, using the tribe's person to say that, yes, that is the Indian custodian. This is totally appropriate. A couple of that I have done, I guess, what you have to consider is maybe family integrity means different things to different cultures. So in Western culture, reunification is the goal, right? I need my kids in my custody, total control, and that's a win. That's family integrity. I've had two that end up being guardianships. One was a teenager that wanted to go live with her aunt in California, and for mom, she's not losing her rights. She's going to be in her daughter's life forever. And that we were able to negotiate that. The state felt good about it. We felt good about it. And the other one, the mom had already had a tribal court order for guardianship for her mother. And so she lived with her mom and the other child. And so we negotiated a guardianship. This is the one that isn't finalized yet, but we negotiated a guardianship so she could still live with her other child. And they're all together. They're all the family. The state knows that someone else has legal capacity to make safety decisions and take care of the child, but the family's together. Some other cultures don't want that. They wouldn't be okay with that. They want the rights. But in a native culture, it might be different because we're all still family under the same roof. And this is just a Western idea of what a parental right is. Another one is prenatal care. I had a mother who tested positive without informed consent, which is allowed under our Medicaid laws here, so she tested positive without informed consent. I filed a motion to dismiss on that one, and we negotiated a prevention plan because I argued prenatal care has ongoing monitoring and observation of mother. The state would know if she was using drugs again for 9 months. I mean, she's going to be fine. So another one was, and I also raised an ADA issue along with ICWA, clear and convincing evidence for Suboxone use while mom was pregnant because she was under medical care. And so looking for other arguments to combine, if you have two federal laws, that one worked right away. We did get a prevention plan in place, and I got to be at the table for that, which was really important. And I do let my clients know too, if they want to renew your prevention plan, call me, I'll help you. I just want to be sure they don't end up getting stuck in the hidden foster care system as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Shannon, do you have anything to add as far as like some of the strategies or examples that you use for dismissals?
Yeah, no, I think all of those are awesome. And I think those are knowing, I think it all like knowing your client, right? Knowing who you represent and what they want and being a part of that, I think is so critically important. And one thing that we use just kind of with some of those kind of strategies is petitions to invalidate. If the process is going along and active efforts aren't being provided. Petition to invalidate is a specific kind of remedy in ICWA, section 1914. And it's something that we use a fair amount to, kind of put the county on notice, like, hey, you're not doing this right. And here are things that are the reasons why you're not doing it right. So I think all of those things are really important. And I think making sure that the voice of those who we represent is elevated in a way from the very beginning definitely is critically important because the power, Lisa, as you said, that power differential when they're go into a room by themselves or they're an investigation and they don't have representation, how absolutely difficult that can be and how things are so often construed. So I think those strategies, having the tribe along at the very beginning provides some leverage as well. And so I think all those things are critically important.
Awesome. You guys both brought up cultural aspects that are really key to your representation. Of course, ICWA is a law that has provisions in there that active efforts should be culturally relevant. And so that family placement preferences that could be deferred to the tribe, that you follow the tribe's preferences when it comes to family and some of those provisions. So my question is, so representing Native parents, I'm Northern Cheyenne, and so I've grown up in Indian country all my life. And of course, there's been very specific targets to dismantle and marginalize Native people. And so oftentimes there's a lot of different issues that we're squarely facing trauma with the history of racism in this country. What role does cultural humility play in your representation and getting these great outcomes, or even just maybe you're not getting great outcomes, but what role does being a compassionate advocate and having cultural humility in your representation play in how you show up for Native families? Because even to this day, I gave you those sobering numbers that were alive and well in the 1970s. But even today in 2023, we still have a ×3 disproportionality. It's unconscionable that we have this still happening in the United States. So what role does cultural humility and compassionate advocacy play in your representation?
I think it's everything. In regards to how I intend on coming into representation of someone, I feel incredibly grateful for the individuals I work with. We have parent mentors on staff who have experienced the system. And so they come to it with the lens of, the lived experience specific in the system. And it was, I can't remember how many years, 10 years ago, maybe, like when the idea of like parent mentors, but we've always also had an elder on staff. So there's the combination of like the parent mentor and having an elder on staff to me is the grounding. And I remember a very specific point having a meeting with a mom who I'd represented for a while, and the parent mentor was with me in the meeting, and we walked out of the meeting, and the parent mentor's like, she has no idea what you were just talking about. I was like, wait, like I was explaining all these legal ideas and different things that I was sure I was really clear. And she's like, no, she has no sense. She's in a place of like hurt and all this is going on. She's like, I bet if you go back in there and ask her what you were explaining, she would have no sense of what you were saying, because she was really focused on how hurt she was about something that had happened to her child. And she was, of course, she was exactly right. And I remember after that meeting, just having this sense of like, I needed to engage differently and more meaningfully and be more humble in regards to kind of how I approach those situations. And I am hopeful that I do that, but I also know that since that meeting, how I've engaged with the individuals I represent is more meaningful to me, because it's more of a relationship and a connection. And that has really inspired, and I think in regards to how I represent someone in court in a way that I feel better about and more passionate about. So I think it really is the core of everything that we do at the Law Center. I'm hopeful that it is, and I think it's critically important.
Lisa, the same question for you is, what role does cultural humility and compassionate advocacy play in getting
I agree with Shannon. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. I start every case. I contact my client as soon as I get the case and meet with them, and I let them know, I know this is traumatic for you, and I want you to tell me what happened and everything. And I just listen. That's what I started, is just listen. Because I think a lot of people aren't used to being listened to. They're used to being told what to do. I want them to know that they are the most important person in the room. I'm not the important person, even though I'm a lawyer. And I don't make assumptions or pretend to know anything about who they are, where they come from. I ask questions about their family or, you know, like if I know I have an ICWA case, how connected are you to your tribe? How important is this being an ICWA case to you? You know, how important is your children's tribal connection? And do you feel that you've been discriminated against or targeted? And a lot of times people really do. And sometimes they don't, you know, it's different for everyone. But that kind of goes back to what I said about helping build up people's self-esteem also, and recognizing strengths and letting people know that you're a good parent, you know, and I see that you love your kids and that you want to keep them safe too. And, you know, the state has the same goal. And sometimes I'll just say too, like objectively, you have to zoom out of your trauma right now, even though it's very hard, and realize that the state isn't discriminating against you or seeing you as like something bad or like a bad native person, or, you know, I wouldn't say that, but they don't see you as something bad, but they just want to keep your kids safe and they want your family to be okay. And that's what we want too. And just, I guess, I think it does help my clients when I tell them that, like, this isn't about you being a bad person or you doing something bad, and like, don't internalize what this says on this paper. This is just why they're involved and we can fix this, you know. But it is all about compassion and empathy, non-judgmentalness, and finding the strengths and using those to keep the family together or get the family together.
Thank you so much. I agree. I think these are the key things that, of course, you don't learn these skills in law school. You might learn the opposite of these skills actually in law school. And so, what role does and I'm hearing a lot of different things from what you're sharing. You both kind of talked about some of the aggressive legal advocacy that you get when you first get affidavits and you first get petitions. Both kind of talked about coordination. You both talked about cultural humility in your representation. But some of the other skill sets I'm kind of hearing from you guys both is that, like, I know maybe this is you being a special ed teacher before, is just being able to help have resources. So you're kind of showing up with like maybe a case manager kind of, correct me if I'm wrong. So like, what kind of role does that play as far as understanding some of the how services work and how to assess and how to connect and all those things? So
That is kind of funny because sometimes I feel like I am like orchestrating an IEP meeting. I do take a lot of like the multidisciplinary collaborative like policy approaches to getting everyone together at the table, like let's problem solve this. And that is kind of a special ed teacher thing. Like, here's the strengths, we've isolated the issues. Like, how do we work with this family and their special needs to make this work? And I have built good relationships with Child Protective Services as well. That's been essential to my success, is that we can have conversations. They'll call me. They know I'm not going to just try to destroy them in court, that I want to have solutions. They also know that I will call them on rights violations, and I will, you know, I do what I have to do to protect my clients. Absolutely. But we can have a conversation and resolve things. And my client needs to feel heard too, you know.
Shannon, it sounds like you've kind of really developed, and the same question to you is just kind of like, what are these other skill sets that you're kind of bringing to the table? I'm hearing a lot actually, and I know you also serve as the executive director as well as carry a full caseload. So I know you're juggling a lot of balls all the time, but what are some of these other skills that you kind of show up with?
I think one of the biggest things is collaboration, right? And respect. I mean, kind of exactly what Lisa was saying. I think the skill set of knowing the law and knowing the story of the person that we're representing is like, that's kind of foundational. So you have to have that, right? Like, you need to know ICWA, you need to know the child protection law. But then, like, once you have that, then you can use it in a way, I think, to collaborate and to have those connections and try to figure out ways to move forward in a good way. So we do a lot of like, hey, do you want to, you know, county attorney, and we'll invite the county attorney and the caseworker and tribal rep to come to the table and sit down with us and try to figure out a way to address whatever issues are in front of us. So I think that those connections and the collaboration is critically important.
So I think we might be at time. Is that true, Emily?
Yeah, you guys are. But thank you all so much. That was excellent information. It is incredibly valuable to get your unique insights on this and looking at this in the ICWA space. And, you know, one question I had, I don't know that we'll have time to get to it, but I would encourage you to think about it or let me know. I hope it's future conversations we can have. But I'm really curious, from your perspectives, what changes could be put in place to allow like greater opportunity for these preventive legal advocacy efforts and pre-petition representation? I know particularly on Lisa's side, obviously it would be her ability to get the cases right more formally through the state in an earlier time. And Shannon, I'm sure that you have some wonderful insights on that as well. And we do need to go to break, but we've got a couple of minutes. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that, Shannon? And kind of what looking ahead, what changes could really help in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the collaboration piece, right? Like understanding where the cases or where who is seeing the cases, before they get into court. So we have started conversations with in Hennepin County with Child Protection Service investigators, right? Because we know that is kind of the first step as far as the court process. But then even stepping further back is the relationships with community providers is key to us. So we know that there is a lot of and I know they've been kind of talked about throughout the day, but community providers that may work with young moms or may, the medical providers. And so having those relationships and collaboration so that they know that they can reach out to us is important. So I think it is a lot about relationships, I think is really key.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, Sheldon, for moderating the panel. It was excellent. Great questions to everybody. And I'm glad you mentioned collaboration, Shannon, because you have teed us up well for our next session. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, but we are going to come back with Sarah Cook for session 8, and we'll be looking at collaboration specifically with the agency in these programs. So I'm excited about that. But with that said, we will go ahead and go to break. And thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you.